SIFTER.com.au.
Hello and welcome to Lightmap from SIFTER. On Lightmap, we explore what it takes to make video games and interactive media, and we meet creative teams from all around the world. My name is Gianni. Thank you so much for joining me. And every episode, you meet developers, artists, musicians, researchers, and more. And our guests on Lightmap this week are some people I'm very excited to talk to. They are now critically and publicly acclaimed developers of DREDGE. They're from Aotearoa, New Zealand. They're from Black Salt Games. We've got Joel Mason, Mikey Bastiaens, and Alex Ritchie. Thank you so much for joining us on the couch.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah. We can't wait to learn a little bit more about your fishing minigame extravaganza, taking the best part of any game and turning it into a full game. But before we jump into that, let's find out what's been making the news this week on Walkthrough, which is SIFTER's weekly news podcast.
Hi, I'm Fiona Bartholomaeus.
And I'm Kyle Pauletto.
And here are the top stories this week on Walkthrough, SIFTER's weekly news podcast for Sunday, 2nd of April.
We take a big look at Zelda Tears of the Kingdom after this week's gameplay reveal.
E3 is officially dead after organisers cancelled the event as developers and publishers pull out.
The Australian government wants to give all games with loot boxes a mature rating or higher.
And Dungeon Crawling Dark and Darker pulled from Steam as developers raided by police.
You can get every episode of Walkthrough for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or on our website, sifter.com.au, every Sunday.
Now, we've got them on the line. Let's reel them in. Can you tell us a little bit about what DREDGE is if people haven't come across it before?
So I guess the elevator pitch for DREDGE is it is a cosmic horror fishing adventure. I think those 4 words kind of sum it up pretty well. But yeah, it is a beautifully atmospheric fishing game where you go out, you catch fish, you come back and sell them and upgrade your boat. And on the surface, it all seems kind of pleasant, but you'll soon discover that there's something more than meets the eye when the fog rolls in and it gets dark and you start encountering things out on the water.
Let's go right back to the beginning. Where did this project start for you? What was the sort of the grain of an idea that turned into DREDGE?
So we kicked off this project, I think 2 years and 2 months ago, pretty much to the day from launch. And yeah, it was one of the prototypes we were working on. We kicked off this new studio, Black Salt Games, together, and we were prototyping a few different ideas, one of which was this weird fishing game. And it tested really well with all the people we got to play it. And so we turned it into a full thing. I think I've always wanted to make a fishing game. I love fishing games and fishing mini games. And yeah, just the cosmic horror, spooky atmosphere just sort of goes hand in hand with the deep ocean for me.
Can you tell me what was it that was really connecting with people when you were testing it out? What was it that people came back to you saying, hey, this is something different, or you noticed the difference, and that was why you sort of continued on with it?
Well, I guess for me, I was one of the initial, prototype testers before I jumped onto this project anyway. And it was just something that was just eerily moody and atmospheric. And then I think that's what reined in a lot of other people because it's just really kind of mysterious. It feels a bit different than any other game. And I think that when all the art started coming together, it just really fit really well. It just felt like this has got something behind it.
What I really like is that you feel that real pressure to just push a little bit further, try to get a little bit into a riskier position, and every time the game is kind of pulling back on you, pulling you back into port. Can you tell me a little bit about designing the challenge of, 4 players when they're going out on each day to try and see what they can find?
A lot of the game design is based around, as you say, that risk-reward style of play, but also allowing players to control their investment into the horror side of the game. We're not hugely horror-based gamers. We just love the atmosphere that a lot of those horror games have. So we wanted to give players that agency to say, no, it's 5 p.m. now. I'm done. I'm going back to shore, and I'm going to sleep through the night. Or if players really wanted to push through and, catch those squid that come out at night, then they can do that. But there might be things out there to meet them.
Yeah, there was a lot of playtesting that went in, and I think just strategically placing things just a little bit out of your reach, potentially. So you always get a little bit like, maybe I can make it. And then you miss a couple notches and the time goes by like, oh no, now it's like nighttime. Now I start freaking out.
Yeah, very early on, we placed the different regions around the world in a very deliberate distance from your starting area. So unless you had made sufficient upgrades to your engines, you couldn't reach those further islands unless without going into nighttime. So yeah, forcing players to really think about their loadout with regards to time.
Alex, I wonder if you can talk to this, but one of the things that really captured me was the first time I pulled in one of the aberrations, one of the weird fish that you pull out of the ocean. Normally on the map, they, when in your little inventory, they look exactly the same sort of shape, but they look a bit freaky. Can you tell me a little bit about designing some of those things and sort of opening up that world into the sort of creepier and weirder stuff under the sea?
Yeah, those were a lot of fun to make. So I got to just go kind of a little bit wild with the designs and just kind of explore the first things that would come to my head. I would try them out. If something didn't work, I'd try something else out. I liked putting disgusting things on the fish and just seeing how far I could push it. And then when I had trouble thinking of ideas, I would shout out, and these guys would give me some ideas to bounce off of as well. And then we would just kind of see what comes out of it. Also, if you just Google some deep sea fish, you're going to find horrific nightmare creatures and that are like real. And that's pretty big inspiration for making also nightmare fish.
How do you take it further than the nightmare of the real world?
Yeah, there's a lot of like human teeth and stuff on some of these fish.
That does it. If you just take any human feature and put it on a fish, you're already in the right zone.
What I really liked as well is because each of the fish kind of have their set shape, almost their set silhouette, when you pick it up, you kind of have to actually really check. You hear the audio clue that you've picked up something scary, but you open it up in your inventory and then there was something there. Can you tell me a little bit about the design of that and maintaining the silhouettes of these fish while they might be quite different?
The shapes of the fish.
It's important to let players sort of predict the shapes of the fish that they're about to catch, because the game is about inventory management as well. So players sort of make decisions and they think, yeah, I could fit some of those long, thin fish in. I can see them over there in the water. I'm going to go and get them. And if you then grab up something that is square, that kind of throws a spanner in the works. So we don't really do that. We keep the silhouette of the fish the same. We just mess it up a lot.
Tell me a little bit about sort of designing the world in which you're living in. Obviously, the comparisons to, Lovecraft and that sort of eldritch world is there, but talk about the design of that world that you've created and what sort of things did you pull from and what did you want to do your own?
Well, I guess if we go by, I know that I was doing a lot of work on the buildings, and then so I was just searching up like abandoned whaling stations or abandoned like coastal towns, and there was just plenty of awesome references for that. And then Alex earlier on, he went through and just kind of gave an idea for each of the different kind of biomes and zones and everything like that. And then so I was like, all right, here is this kind of volcanic area and zone. I'm like, oh, what goes well there? Just like Greek, Persian sort of ruins, and we can sync those things up because there's also some kind of like Mesopotamian lore stuff that ties back into some of the Lovecraftian sort of things. And of course, when you have a whaling town, you might as well pull in like the actual whaling stuff in there as well. And then seeing how many of those abandoned stations are, they just look really awesome and stuff.
What about story-wise? Tell me how that you wanted to tell the story that you told in this game, because it is one that you can kind of discover as you play. I didn't feel like I was really kind of forced into doing it. I could just kind of go and pull at all little threads that I liked as I went along.
Yeah, that was definitely our intention. The original design of the game had very little in the way of story. But when we tested it with our friends, they all wanted to know more about the world. So it ended up being a 30,000 word script. But it was important to us to not put pages and pages of writing in front of players and force them to read it. So allowing the main line through the quests to be really simple and really concise, but also providing opportunities for players to ask further questions of our characters or find things in the world, whether that's through our messages in a bottle or crazy symbols scratched onto the wall of a cave somewhere that mean something. There's a lot of that ambient storytelling that we try to add to the game.
Why didn't you want to go deeper in it? Is it just a scope sort of question that you didn't want to make it a big story, or is it just did not fit? Why did you not go, more voiced, or for example, like all of these things and having a big, big engrossing story that really carried people through?
I think really we wanted to focus on the gameplay for a lot of it. You start the game and we deliberately try to get you out there sailing and catching fish as soon as possible, within like 45 seconds. So yeah, just allowing players to always get back to that gameplay if they really want to. That was a core goal for us.
For me, some of my favorite stories in games are the ones that just quite don't tell you everything. They tell you enough to get your brain going and trying to fill the gaps. And I think that was something that kind of we wanted to do as well, right from the beginning. Leave enough mystery for people to kind of make up their own theories.
Yeah, we're pretty big fans of all the Soul series games and everything as well, where they are very much like that, where most of the actual story in that game is kind of filtering through the kind of the item descriptions and all those sort of things.
Alex, can you tell me a little bit about the characterization of the people that you meet in this game? Because, one that really struck me is when you meet the researcher off near the Stranded Deep, I think it is, or the reef. And she has quite a very different look to the rest of everyone there. To me, I read that as someone who has come into this world and hasn't spent their whole life there. But tell me about some of the character that you wanted to get out of these illustrations you have for the people in the game.
We would have our discussions about what characters are the main characters for each area and what kind of stories you're going to get out of them. And Joel would kind of have an overview of what the character is kind of going to be. And then we would talk about vaguely what they should look like and what they should dress like before I even start sketching. So after all that, it's actually fairly straightforward for me to get a sketch that we all agree on. There wasn't a lot of iterations for many of the characters, to be honest. Just kind of fell into place, I guess.
Joel, can you tell me, I guess, what were the sort of main pillars of the story that you wanted to be for each of those particular areas that you visit, the swamp, the reef, the volcano, all of that sort of thing? What were you trying to explore with each of those zones as players were getting better at fishing, better at doing exploring the world?
So I think it was important for us to add a lot of visual variety in these areas, kind of falling into the video game trope of the lava level and the jungle level, but, sort of our own spin on some of these things. In terms of the characters, we wanted to kind of separate them into sort of different emotional tones, I guess. This is a really sort of horrible and depressing world, the game, that is. But not everybody sort of reacts the same way to this world. Some of them are depressed, but some of them are sort of paranoid. Some of them are, somehow upbeat despite everything. So it was really important to give these characters a slightly different voice to each other, and that sort of had to come through in their text, in their dialogue, but also in their character art.
Mikey, maybe could you tell me about designing some of the look of the world and sort of character and story that you'd like to tell through that, some of the explorations that you did that maybe worked or didn't work as you were trying to prototype the way that the game actually felt?
Yeah, so I did a lot of work on all the monsters and the environment stuff, and one of the main things I remember doing was some of the planes and everything, so we had to find period-specific kind of planes and everything as well, because we don't really explicitly say what date everything is in the game, but we've got a rough idea of where that was at, so I was trying to make sure that things are kind of appropriate for the kind of time period that we were trying to roughly set the game within. And then when it came to doing the monsters, then I think it was just a case of, all right, how wild can I go with this? What did we want the player to do? Because whenever we set up each of those different zones, the first thing we wanted to do was how do we want players to kind of act in the zone? What sort of actions do we want them to kind of do? How do we want them to avoid a particular creature? Where do we want them to go? How do we funnel players around? And then designing creatures that kind of fit those kind of elements into the game as well. So I think in Twisted Strand, we wanted something that kind of just basically scares you away from a particular area that might force you deeper into the kind of the twisted jungle and everything like that. And then you're stuck, and then you get trapped, and then you start panicking, and then everything else kind of goes crazy there. And then so we had lots of fun doing that one. I remember just doing a bunch of different scribbles for like, how about this kind of creature? How about a crocodile? How about a crab? How about an axolotl with wings? How about this? And we went with like the worm thing and stuff. So it was really fun coming up with those sort of ideas. Yeah.
How much of the danger is in the players' heads by setting that mood of it, and how much of it is in the actual game? Like, can people be completely destroyed, or do you play with the sort of the danger in the background so that it's always people on the edge of their seat?
There's a lot of fear that is kind of driven purely by the player's own imagination, especially right at the very start, where we kind of introduce things in very slowly, and sometimes it's just sounds. And then that usually just terrifies people in the first place, or then they'll start seeing something, and then they'll think it's a lot worse than it actually is. I think towards the end, when players kind of get used to things, the kind of whole shock and fear of it all kind of becomes a little bit diluted at that point. But for the people that are always going to be like, I don't want to go out at night, that fear will kind of always stay there until they really get done in by something.
Yeah, there's a particular thing that can happen more towards the start of the game, which is literally just a splash in the water next to the boat. But we've seen people scream from that, and I think that shows that people are in the right mood for the game if they're screaming at that, or in fact we've seen people scream at their own shadow.
The dolphins and whales definitely got me as I was going along, coming out of the water. Normally a lovely thing, but tell you what, you do not want to see a shape movie like that as you're going along. What I really loved was the ways that you sort of varied the catching mechanic that you're playing. They were reminiscent of ones that I had seen before, but there were some that were pretty different. Can you talk to me about designing that particular gameplay for players?
Yeah, so obviously the fishing minigame is a huge part of any game, but also ours. So we had a few key goals with the fishing mechanic, and it was that it should be as accessible to as many people as possible. It shouldn't feel frustrating. And it had to feel okay to do for 10, 12 more hours. So one of the ways that we achieved a lot of these goals is actually making it essentially optional, in that when you play the minigame, it is sort of completing itself, but you can help speed it up by interacting at the right time. And yeah, that just means that if you want to chill out, you can just catch stuff and you don't have to worry. We also mix up the style of fishing minigame based on what you're catching and where you're catching it, which helps keep it a little fresh.
Yeah, I think the main thing is like this whole idea of like your main resource that you're trying to manage is essentially that time. And then so as you are fishing, if you're good at it, you catch them quicker. But you're also just staring at the little wheel the entire time, and you're not really paying attention to the time that's ticking up in the top. And then when you finally get that fish, then it's another simple sort of little easy game, which is just basically the Tetris fitting that fish into the right spot. And then because these things are relatively simple, it's easy to kind of go to one thing, get distracted by that thing, then here's this other little thing, think about things a different way. You just keep getting stuck in this simple little loop, and then realizing, oh, time's gone, and everything as well. And then because of all the other things that surround it, it just seems to have just worked out perfectly of these couple simple mechanics, but when they tie together, they become a bit more in depth, and it seems to have worked out really well for us.
Yeah, that zones of focus sort of idea, that you're really concentrating on certain things and not looking at the periphery. How did that design kind of come about? Did you notice it in something else that you really liked, or was it just something that was, felt right in the experimentation as you were developing?
There are a few elements of sort of claustrophobia in the game. Obviously the primary one is when you're out at night, that first night, and the fog really closes in on you. There's a very small range of sight that you get. But also, when you're fishing, we pull the camera up above you and sort of look down into the depths, which conveniently stops you from noticing anything that may be approaching from the side, because after all, your character is focused on fishing down in the depths. So we sort of play a few tricks on you with that claustrophobia feeling.
One of the things I also really loved was that you really can just go and do one thing every day if you wanted to. There's plenty of things you can choose to do. There was always something you could head off and try and achieve. Can you tell me about sort of designing that process of the gameplay?
I don't know if that was a deliberate or a conscious part of our design, but we just sort of kept adding adding layers to the game, and things to find and things to do. And we see a lot of sort of magpie behavior in our players who go out and see something shiny and they think, oh, I'm going to go do that. And on the way to that, they see something else that's cool. And they end up sort of getting nothing done, particularly on any given day. But they've seen a lot of cool things, and ideally they've gotten lost and they're suddenly in the fog, in the dark, and they have a cool moment. So yeah, there's a lot of different distractions for players, and it's sort of up to them to focus on something and get it done.
You mentioned a little bit about watching people play your game. What has been some of the most surprising aspects of the way that people approach your game that you didn't think people would do, or things that have really made it, big impact on the team?
I think people have been because we've been watching a lot of the streamers, because it's been pretty enjoyable to kind of watch them all kind of freak out and everything like that. And they've all kind of got their own way of approaching it. And I think that's what's been really interesting, because we wanted people to kind of play it in their own kind of way. And you get the people that were like, oh, I'm just going to see what it's like, and then just getting caught up with everything that's kind of going on. And then sometimes their chat there's a lot of backseat gaming, it feels like, from their kind of group. And they're just like, no, I don't need to do that. And they just listen to the chat. And then something terrible will happen to them every single time. And it's just been pretty funny watching all of that stuff. So that's been great, watching other people play through and experiencing things the way they have been.
I don't know if there's anything that's particularly surprised me that I've seen, but there are a lot of sort of hidden mechanics that we've deliberately hidden in the game, and seeing players understand how they work and then using them to their advantage. There are some sort of side effects to some of the abilities that the player has. And yeah, seeing them used as the perfect tool in a player's arsenal is really satisfying.
Some of those things came about from us actually watching players, though, because we've been playtesting throughout all of development, and at a certain point, there's a way to deal with some birds in the game, and before we had a way to deal with them, we watched some players play the game, and they would just instinctually try a certain thing with one of our abilities, and we were like, oh, that's a great idea. That makes sense. And kind of it turned into an ability because of that.
Well, there's a lot to discover, and, some of those sort of emergent things that, when I just turned around a corner and found a little hidden shrine that was requesting crabs from me, and then all of a sudden found an incredible crab net. Can you tell me, are there other secrets that you've buried in this game that anyone hasn't come across yet, or is it still pretty sort of surface level, or all available for people to find?
There are at least 2 significant things or mechanics that I've not seen anybody get yet, and one of them was something that I was sure people were going to find eventually. And I mean, it's only been 4 days at this point. But yeah, there's some big things in there for people to find.
As a studio, I know you're a small team. Can you tell me what it's been like to see the reception in this last couple of days since the game has been out, and about a week before that when critics started to get their hands on it? How does it feel to be at this point?
Yeah, it's been really awesome. I think for Alex and myself, who don't really follow too much of the reply, keep an eye on the Discord side of things too much, because there's a lot of stuff to kind of filter through. So we've been kind of taking a little bit step back, all right, this is all kind of cool, just watch those sort of things. But I think so Nadia, producer, and Joel, they're always paying a really close attention to all the stuff that's coming through and replying to people. And I'm like, whoa, man, there's a lot of stuff coming through now. It's pretty insane seeing the kind of response and support that everyone's been giving us. It's been crazy.
Yeah. The critic reviews combined with the Steam reviews, the reception to both has been beyond my wildest dreams. I mean, all I ever wanted was an overwhelmingly positive. And we hit that, and that was my number one success metric for this game, and we did it. So I'm so happy with that.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, I've got there are YouTubers and streamers that I've been watching for years, and seeing a bunch of them play our game. I watched Carnage finish our game a couple days ago. That was crazy. How
has the release sort of changed things for you as a studio? What was your plans looking like, in 6 months' time, 2 weeks ago versus what it looks like now?
It's kind of hard to say, because this is kind of our first day back in the office since launch. So we haven't really had a chance to have any of those discussions yet. But, exceeded our expectations in every metric, basically. So I think, I think we have a future to plan now, which is great.
Is the world of Dredge one that you want to revisit? Is there more stories to tell in this game, or is it something that you wanted to kind of finish and put a bow on and move on to the next project?
I think that's the next discussion that we kind of had, because I think we've been waiting on, like, we'll see if people actually like the game, and then if it gets a lot of support, then who knows, maybe we will delve back into this world. But I think those discussions are going to be put on the shelf just for a little bit longer and everything, and then we'll figure out all of that side of things.
Can you tell me what is the biggest thing that you have learnt through this process? One thing that you wish that you knew at the beginning of the project and now come out of it and think this is the one thing I would do differently in every future game that I work on?
For me, at least, it's felt like, all right, it's actually putting into practice everything that I've been kind of picking up over the last, decade or so in the industry anyway. So just to kind of have hey, look, we can actually do this sort of thing. That's been the really cool side of things for me, at least anyway. And then I guess it'll be a case of, all right, now can we replicate it again with the next thing or whatever we do next? So that's what I'm looking forward to seeing or doing next, I guess.
For me, I don't know if it was the biggest thing, but it was certainly a large thing, which was the reception to our demo. So we had a demo for the game out as part of the Steam Next Fest last October-ish. And I was sort of the opinion that people didn't play demos anymore, or that if you played a demo, you sort of got your fill of the game, and then you thought, oh, yeah, I don't need to play the rest of that. But the reception to our demo completely blew me away, and it sort of really started the snowballing effect for the game. It grew our community in a huge way. We had something like 70,000 people play our demo over the Next Fest. And it was kind of the first moment when I thought that, we actually have a game that people like here. And it was really encouraging to see.
It's an incredible game, one that I've really enjoyed and one that has sort of held a place in my mind as I think of all the remaining fish that I need to catch. I tell you what, I can't find that gulper eel. If you can point me in the direction of where to get one of those, it's really causing me a lot of strife just searching out there in the world. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Joel, Mikey, and Alex. I really appreciate you joining us on the latest episode of Lightmap.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, great.
You can find more about the game by heading to dredge.game or check it out on just about everything, actually. It's on just about every platform you could possibly want to play it on. It's a really good one to experience and one that you should go in, I think, pretty blind, I think is probably the advice. If you can try go in it as cold as you can. We've kept this relatively spoiler-free throughout this interview. SIFTER is produced by Fiona Bartholomaeus, Daniel Ang, Adam Christou, Mitch Lowe is senior producer, and my name is Gianni Di Giovanni, and I'm the executive producer. Thanks to Omny Studio for their support of SIFTER's podcast. You can find everything we talked about on our website, which is sifter.com.au. And while you're online, why not check out the SIFTER Discord? That's sifter.com.au/Discord, where people share their creative works. We've got model makers, we've got zine makers, people who are doing game dev, all of that sort of stuff. They did jump in and share what they're working on. It's a really cool place to spend some time. That's sifter.com.au/Discord. That's all the time we have for now. Until next time, have fun.